I hadn't been to my parents' house in over 3 months. Not because I didn't have time. I made time for people who respected mine. But this dinner, it was mandatory, as my mother put it in the family group text. Cheryl was in town. That changed everything, apparently. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on, casting long shadows across the walkway. Inside, the smell of pot roast mixed with something overly citrusy, probably one of Mom's wax melts labeled family hearth or some nonsense like that. I stepped in and was hit with the same wall of photos. Cheryl graduating, Cheryl holding a microphone at some conference, Cheryl with our parents at a gala. I wasn't in any of them. Nobody greeted me when I walked in. I took off my jacket and hung it over the same hook I'd been using since high school. My mother finally turned from the kitchen and said, "You wore that shirt?" Not a hello, not a how are you, just a wrinkle of her nose and a head tilt. Cheryl's wearing a blazer. I just thought. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My shirt was fine. I'd just come off a 10-hour shift and barely had time to run a comb through my hair, let alone dress like I was walking into a board meeting. Dinner was already set, the good plates, the real silverware, even a folded cloth napkin at each setting. I sat at the far end, diagonal from my dad. He grunted something that sounded like evening. Cheryl smiled like a politician shaking hands at a fundraiser. My niece Jessica waved at me. She always did. At least someone still remembered I existed. The seats filled, plates were passed, and glasses clinked. Everything was civil, too civil. Then came the toast. "To Cheryl," my mother said, raising her glass. "She's always been our light. She makes us proud every day." She paused, smiling at Cheryl, then added, "Not every child ends up successful, but at least they try." The silence that followed was so thick it could have been sliced. My hand clenched around my water glass. I didn't say a word, not when my dad cleared his throat and looked away, not when Cheryl shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes not meeting mine, not even when my fingers began to go numb from gripping the glass so tightly. Jessica tried to lighten the mood with a joke about mashed potatoes looking like clouds. No one laughed. I'd heard worse. But hearing it like that, in front of extended family, like I was some cautionary tale, burned deeper than usual. I stared at my plate but tasted nothing. My thoughts were louder than the clinking forks. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd made when Dad said the business hit a rough patch, the $81,000 I'd paid toward Grandpa's medical bills over the past 2 years. The checks I'd written quietly, without needing praise. I thought about how no one at this table knew that when Grandpa's meds were running out, I was the one driving 3 towns over to pick them up, just so they wouldn't show up late. "Cheryl has dreams," Mom once told me. "You have duty." Like it was a compliment. Like being the one who picked up the pieces wasn't worth remembering. I never told anyone what I'd paid. I thought the sacrifices would eventually speak for themselves. I was wrong. Mom kept going with the toast, as if the air wasn't thick with judgment. "She even drove all the way here every weekend to sit with your grandfather," she said, placing a hand on Cheryl's arm, "even when she was tired." That's rich. Cheryl came in for 45 minutes, took selfies, and left. The room nodded along like sheep. Then Dad chimed in. "She's got the heart for this kind of thing. You're more practical." I looked at him. He looked at his plate. My jaw tightened. Cheryl's eyes finally met mine, and then they looked away. I pushed my chair back and stood. "I need more water," I said flatly, grabbing the pitcher from the center of the table. At the sink, I stared into the glass, the light catching tiny bubbles as the water filled. My grip on the pitcher was too firm. My hand shook. I wasn't about to make a scene. That's not who I was. But I also wasn't going to sit there and keep pretending anymore. I was about to be the bad guy at the good girls' party, I thought. I sat back down, slowly, deliberately. I looked around the table, the food, the smiles, the fake laughter, the rehearsed pride. That was the moment I decided. Next time they asked for anything, they'd get more than a yes. They'd get the truth. A week after that dinner, I found myself walking through the wide double doors of the funeral home, already bracing for whatever came next. I told myself to keep expectations low, but somehow, a small part of me still hoped they'd remember who I was. The chapel was packed. Neighbors, distant cousins, members from Grandpa's church, most of them lined up to greet Cheryl. She stood near the guest book, soaking in hugs and whispered condolences like a local celebrity. I stood off to the side until one of the ushers approached. "Name?" he asked without looking up from his clipboard. "Dale Merrick," I said, voice steady. He scanned the list and paused, then offered a tight smile. "We've got you in the side row, non-immediate family and late confirmations." I nodded. What was there to say? I followed him to a row along the back wall. The view was fine. The implication wasn't. I sat down and stayed quiet. The lights dimmed, and the slideshow began. Pictures of Grandpa's life filled the screen. As each one faded into the next, the pattern became obvious. Cheryl as a toddler on Grandpa's lap, Cheryl in graduation robes, Cheryl at a barbecue with him smiling wide behind her, one after another. No photos of me. None. Not one. Behind me, a child whispered, "Did he not have a son named Dale?" I didn't turn around. It hit me then. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been erased. Not being remembered is passive. This took intention. They'd curated a version of history, and I wasn't in it. After the service ended, people trickled out into the lobby. Instead of following, I veered left and walked down the hallway to the funeral office. I needed to clear one last invoice. I figured it'd be quick. The woman at the desk looked up with the sort of politeness that comes from doing this too often. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about final billing for Eugene Merrick," I said. "I've handled some of the payments." She clicked through a few tabs on her screen. "Oh, I see. This was arranged by Cheryl Araujo. She's listed as the main contact." I blinked. "Could you print the invoice breakdown?" "Sure thing." She handed me the papers a minute later. My name wasn't on any of them, not even in the payment fields, not the deposits, not the insurance overage, not the hospice fees I'd specifically paid for. They'd replaced me. On paper, too. I thanked her, folded the papers neatly, and walked outside. The air was sharp against my face, a breeze tugging at my sleeves like it knew I needed grounding. I leaned against the railing for a minute and tried to make sense of it. That wasn't just disrespect, it was something colder. They hadn't just ignored what I did, they'd rewritten who did it. Back inside, Cheryl was now hugging people at the door, her face pinched in what I could only assume was grief, or maybe the act of it. Barbara was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Kenton stood with his hands behind his back, stone-faced. The minister offered to let any family member say a few words. Cheryl stepped forward before anyone else could. She started with a story about Grandpa calling her his little nurse, about how she tried to be there even when life got busy. People smiled. One woman near the front wiped away a tear. "He once told me," Cheryl said, "that I reminded him of how strong women in this family used to be, that I made him proud." Barbara nodded through her tears. Kenton looked proud. And me? I didn't move, didn't stand, didn't speak. I thought about standing, about clearing my throat and saying, "Actually, the person who paid for the last 6 months of his life is sitting in the back row." But I didn't. It wasn't the time. Not yet. On my way out, I stopped under the overhang by the parking lot to check my phone. There it was. Subject: Payment confirmation. Hospice of Central North Texas. Amount: $7,400 into dollars. Method: Dale Merrick. Visa. They could erase me from the slideshow. They could leave my name off the programs. They could call Cheryl the backbone of Grandpa's final days. But the receipts, they never lied. By the time I made it home, the silence felt heavier than usual. The kind of quiet that settles over you after a long drive, a longer funeral, and a lifetime of being pushed to the edges of your own family's story. I kicked off my shoes, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and left it untouched on the counter. The overhead light buzzed softly. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't need background noise. I walked over to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the accordion file I hadn't touched in weeks, the one labeled Family Expenses. It had started as a way to keep things organized. Now it was proof. Of what, I wasn't sure yet, but I knew it mattered. I sat on the edge of the couch, unfolded the first few papers. Invoices from Grandpa's hospice, statements from the mortgage company, handwritten notes with amounts and dates. I didn't even blink. My eyes just scanned them like they were part of my job. And then I saw the journal. It had been wedged behind a folder of tax documents, small, leather-bound, worn at the corners. I recognized the handwriting on the first page before I even opened it. Barbara's. My mother had left this in my apartment, probably the last time she came by to drop off leftovers I didn't ask for. I flipped through the pages, expecting grocery lists or sermon quotes. But no, this was different. Each page was labeled, Dale's support. First entry, said I'd pay him back $2,500. Didn't. We need more help next quarter. Another page, mortgage still being covered by Dale. Good. Cheryl needs space to focus on the nonprofit. I stopped reading for a second, let the room breathe around me. I turned another page. Dale will always help. No need to explain. He's used to being the background. That line sat on my chest like a weight. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was strategy. I stood up, moved back to the desk, and powered on my computer. My hands moved without hesitation now, logging into my bank account and scrolling back. 2 years of transactions, each labeled, each unchallenged. Recurring charges to Central North Texas Hospice, monthly payments to the mortgage servicer, several large pharmacy purchases I'd forgotten about. I opened my email and typed in payment confirmation. The results were instant. Dozens of emails, subject lines all the same. I clicked one at random. Thank you for your continued support of the Family Assistance Program. Payment processed. I hadn't signed up for any program. I called the hospice office. The woman on the phone was polite. Too polite. Billing contact is Cheryl Araujo, but the default payment method listed is Dale Merrick. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I said thank you and hung up. They used my silence as consent. That sentence repeated itself in my head as I opened my printer tray and started pulling out sheets. I didn't stop until the table was full. Then I got the tape. One by one, I placed each receipt, each confirmation, each record along the living room wall. It looked like an investigation scene. At the very end, I taped the last item, the $7,400 invoice from the day before Grandpa died. I stepped back. There it was, a timeline of quiet sacrifices, a map of money and silence, and no one else had seen it but me. I muttered aloud, though no one was there to hear it. I paid to keep the house lit while they sat in the living room and ignored me. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I opened a new folder on my laptop, named it Receipts, for when they ask again. I opened a blank document and typed one line. You don't have to scream to fight back. Then I gathered every paper, every file, every stitch of evidence, and placed it into a new envelope. Not to send, just to keep close, just in case. I slid it into the bottom drawer and turned the lock. Next time they come asking, I won't be the one answering. Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air feels too still and everything outside looks like it's holding its breath. I parked on the street in front of my parents' house. Though there was plenty of space in the driveway, I didn't want to block Cheryl's car. The text from my mother earlier had been short. Come by. We need to talk. Bring that invoice. Not please, not thank you. Just logistics. When I walked in, Cheryl was already perched at the kitchen island with a cup of tea, acting like she lived there. Mom was plating cookies she likely bought from the store, but transferred to her own dish to look homemade. Dad was out in the backyard, hammering something into the fence like the sound of wood splitting could drown out everything else. Hi, sweetheart, Mom said, voice syrupy sweet. You're just in time. Her tone was off, too pleasant, too prepared. I knew this wasn't a conversation, it was a performance. Then I saw it. Cheryl's sweater. It was dark gray, soft knit, the cuffs slightly rolled at the wrists. I'd recognize it anywhere. Grandpa gave it to me when I landed my first job after college. He'd even sewn in a small patch near the bottom hem. DM, stitched in navy thread. But the patch was gone. In its place, a new one, CA. Where'd you get that? I asked casually, nodding toward the sweater. Cheryl looked down like she'd forgotten she was wearing it. "Oh, this. Mom gave it to me last month. Said it was just sitting around." Mom chimed in without missing a beat. "It was in your closet for years, Dale. Cheryl actually wears it. What's the point of letting things just sit and collect dust?" I didn't respond, not out loud. Inside, something snapped. But not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't scream or argue, the kind that dies quietly in the back of your throat. I remembered the day Grandpa gave it to me. We were sitting on that same back porch Dad was hammering near now. He handed it to me in a brown paper bag. "Not many men work quietly," he'd said, "but you do." He knew I didn't ask for credit, but even he would have called this theft. And still, I said nothing, because I knew what this visit was really about. Mom brought out a folded sheet of paper, placed it gently on the island. "It's another pharmacy invoice," she said, "from the last refill before he passed." I glanced at the amount. It wasn't small, but I didn't react. "Just until Cheryl gets her bonus," she added. "You know how tight things are right now." I nodded slowly, preparing to respond, when she leaned in, her voice low but pointed. "Don't make this about money. He was your grandfather, too." Then came the line, the one that changed everything. "If you don't help, what does that say about you, Dale?" That wasn't a question. That was a threat disguised in guilt. I folded the invoice neatly, slid it into my coat pocket. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Mom smiled, assuming compliance. Cheryl looked down into her tea. They thought silence was agreement, but I was done giving them that. I glanced at the sweater again. The patch wasn't just removed. It had been replaced, rebranded, like everything else in this family. They hadn't just taken something that belonged to me. They'd rewritten who it belonged to. That evening, back at my apartment, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room as I scrolled to my budgeting spreadsheet. I clicked into the tab labeled Family Expenses and added a new line under November. Presented, November 5th. Declined. Pending. Below it, I typed a note in bold. No longer their ATM. Watch what they do next. Then I sat back, stared at the screen, and said it aloud. Some debts aren't financial. Some are cuts. No thread can stitch. I got the voicemail just after lunch. I was still at my desk, flipping through a stack of printed lab reports when the phone buzzed. It was from Mr. Henry, one of Grandpa's oldest friends. "Dale," he said, warm but a little too rehearsed. "I just wanted to say, Cheryl really stepped up for him. Your folks told me all about what she did in those final months. I know he was proud of her." I listened to it twice, not because I didn't hear it the first time, but because I needed to feel the sting again. Just enough to stop myself from replying. The worst part wasn't the inaccuracy. It was that it had become the version people believed. When the story is told enough times, it doesn't matter who lived it, only who narrates it. At work, one of my younger co-workers passed by my desk and smiled. "Saw that tribute Cheryl posted. That was beautiful," she said. "You all must have been close." I nodded. "Yeah. Real close." Later that day, I shut my office door for 10 minutes just to sit in silence. It was getting harder to know which parts of me still belonged to me. A week later, I had an interview with a mid-sized tech firm in town. Not a promotion, just lateral movement. A clean break from the place where I was always the reliable one. The hiring manager was kind, smiled a lot. We talked about metrics, documentation, leadership alignment. I answered confidently. Then came the curveball. "What motivates you?" I'd heard that question before. It's one of those fluffy HR fillers that no one takes seriously. But this time, my brain didn't load anything. It just stopped. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. She waited. I cleared my throat. "Survival," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "I guess," trying to mean something. "Somewhere." She nodded, but the energy in the room shifted. She offered a weak smile and wrote something down. I knew I'd lost the moment. Not because I wasn't qualified, but because whatever fire I used to walk in with, it had burned out. Afterward, I stood in the restroom, staring at the mirror. The fluorescent lights overhead made my eyes look sunken. My tie was crooked. My own reflection looked like someone I used to know. I walked out of the building, didn't even check my phone until I was already halfway down the block. Nothing new, no missed calls, no one needing me. Back home, I texted Eileen and asked if she wanted to grab coffee. The cafe was quiet, tucked away behind a hardware store. She was already at a table when I arrived, sipping something with foam. No judgment in her eyes, just concern. I didn't need to explain much. She knew. I told her about the voicemail, the interview, the sweater, all of it. She listened, didn't interrupt, just nodded and waited. "What would Grandpa say if he saw all this?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "He'd ask why I let people take what was never theirs." We sat there for a long moment, the hum of the espresso machine in the background, someone's baby giggling behind us. Aileen finally leaned in and said, "Then maybe it's time you stop letting them." No lecture, no pep talk, just that. Later that night, I sat at my desk again. I opened the binder, the one with receipts, invoices, printed emails. I started circling dates, payments, events, Facebook posts. The pattern was clear. Every time I made a payment, Cheryl posted something. Every time there was a tribute, I was nowhere in it. They didn't just let the world forget, they helped it forget. On purpose. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I clicked print, slipped each page into sheet protectors, labeled them by date, filed them into a new binder. On the spine, I wrote one word: truth. The next morning, I packaged everything. Receipts, summaries. A full printout of the $81,000 I'd paid, color-coded, no return address. I dropped it into the mailbox outside their church, just before Sunday service would start. If they're going to lie for the legacy, the least I can do is leave them the truth. Sunday morning started like any other. Coffee, shower, buttoned shirt. Except this time, I didn't drive to church because of habit. I went because they asked, and part of me, maybe the last part still holding on, thought something might be different. The service ended the same way it always did. Handshakes, stale cookies in the fellowship hall, plastic cups of juice. I was about to leave when a woman from our neighborhood leaned in toward Cheryl with a grin that was far too wide. "Your tribute to your grandfather was beautiful," she said. Another voice chimed in. "She's really the heart of the family, huh?" I stood nearby, unnoticed. Once I made it to the parking lot, I sat in my car, turned off the engine, and pulled out my phone. It didn't take long to find it. Cheryl had posted a tribute video, a slideshow of Grandpa's final days set to soft piano music, quotes about love and family, photos of him in hospice care, Cheryl holding his hand, Cheryl wheeling him outside, Cheryl crying over his bed, and in one frame, barely visible at the bottom of a hospital invoice, my name, billing name, Dale Merrick, amount paid, $3,682. It wasn't even cropped well. Just enough for most people to miss it. But not me. No one had tagged me. No one had mentioned me. They used my money and wrote her name on the story. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I didn't send a text. Instead, I took a screenshot. Then, another. Saved them in a folder I named Misused Truths. I opened the binder on my desk later that afternoon and slipped the images in between invoices and payment confirmations. They don't get to tell my story and borrow my receipts. I said it out loud. Just once. Just to hear how it sounded. The house was quiet. That evening, my phone rang. Uncle Frank. "I saw what they posted," he said. His voice was gruff, like he'd been holding something in. "You handled everything, didn't you?" I didn't answer right away. "You don't have to say it," he added. "I just want you to know. I saw you, even when they tried to erase you." I didn't cry, but I did breathe different after that call. I grabbed a post-it note from the corner of my desk and wrote one thing. Uncle Frank. I stuck it to the first page of the binder. That night, I checked Cheryl's post one more time. Buried under 82 likes and 23 comments, there was one that stood out. A single question. Why is Dale's name on that invoice? No one replied. No one liked it, but it was there. A crack in the story. I didn't comment, didn't share. I just sat back in my chair, binder open, and flipped through the pages slowly, page by page, date by date. I don't need to shout. I just need to be ready. The next morning, as I brewed coffee, my phone buzzed with a group text. Barbara, dinner next Sunday. Family only. Be there. I stared at the screen, letting the steam from the mug fog my glasses. I thought of every bill I'd paid, every conversation I hadn't been part of, every time they smiled while pulling a thread out of me. They want a family dinner. Then I'll bring the family truth. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to walk into a room already spun by someone else's narrative. My shirt was pressed, shoes clean, hair combed back the way Grandpa liked. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was dressing to be undeniable. The house smelled like ham and cinnamon and guilt. Barbara greeted me with a smile so sweet it made my teeth hurt. Cheryl was already there, a wine glass in one hand, phone in the other. Kenton glanced up from the recliner but said nothing. His silence was predictable by now. The table was set with care. Name cards, cloth napkins folded like swans, the kind of effort Mom only pulled out when appearances mattered. My seat was at the far end, furthest from the head, next to the serving cart. It wasn't dinner, it was theater, and I'd been cast as the extra. We sat, passed dishes, chewed politely. Conversations drifted to safe zones, the weather, the new church flooring, Jessica's college applications, but every compliment aimed at Cheryl carried a sharpened edge. She's always thinking ahead, Barbara said, her fork tapping the plate like punctuation. Not afraid to step up when needed, Kenton added. I took a sip of water, counted the beats between comments. This wasn't accidental. This was design. Barbara lifted her glass. To family, the ones who show up and show up right. Jessica looked at me. Just for a second, then looked away. The food was warm. The room was not. Then came the moment. Someone brought up Grandpa. Barbara smiled. He would have been proud of Cheryl. She reminded him of his younger self. So driven. Kenton, nodding, chimed in. He told me once, I hope Carson learns to be more like her. Carson. My name is Dale. I froze. No one blinked. No one corrected him. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and this was the next step in the rewrite. I didn't speak. Inside, something turned cold. My father had either forgotten my name or replaced it. That night, I went home and pulled out the old book Grandpa gave me the year I moved out. It was a collection of essays and poems. I hadn't touched it in years. Flipping through it slowly, I stopped at page 81. Tucked inside was a slip of yellowing paper, folded clean, handwriting familiar. To the one who sees without asking, who gives without needing the credit. You are not forgotten. You are my peace. I read it once, then again, and a third time. No tears, just breath. I set the note on my nightstand, turned off the light. I didn't need their table. I'd build my own. They forgot my name at theirs. But I'll remember who I am at mine. I walked through their front door right on time, 6 o'clock sharp. Not a minute early, not late. I wasn't here to please. I was here to be counted. The table was dressed like a holiday magazine spread, cloth napkins, centerpiece of white candles and faux autumn leaves, plates already set, wine already poured. The only thing missing was honesty. Barbara and Cheryl were chatting near the kitchen, the kind of cheerful that only exists when someone's pretending nothing's wrong. Kenton carved the roast with the focus of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Jessica sat at the far end, eyes on me the moment I entered. Nobody greeted me. I didn't expect them to. I took my seat. No place card for me. Of course not. The room was still, like breath being held. Then came the moment I knew was coming. Barbara raised her glass. To Cheryl, she said, for all her sacrifices, for always being there. I set my fork down, quietly. Cheryl jumped in, as if on cue. Especially those last few months with Grandpa. We really did everything we could, didn't we? I cleared my throat. We? She blinked, smiled. Yes, of course. We all stepped up. I reached into my coat pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table, a hospice invoice. With my name on it, the room went dead quiet. No one moved. I let the silence settle. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder, the one with the labeled tabs, the one I'd been building for 2 years without them knowing. I opened it, spoke softly, clearly. June 3rd, $2,130. Pharmacy, paid in full. I flipped a page. July 17th, hospice rent, $4,050, paid in full. Another page. August 12th, power bill, $380, Cheryl's apartment. Barbara opened her mouth. I raised a hand without looking. This won't take long. I continued, line after line, every payment, every receipt, every sacrifice, total $81,000. When I finished, I closed the binder, gently. No drama. No raised voice. No one said a word. Cheryl looked like she wanted to disappear. Barbara stared at the table like it had betrayed her. Kenton cleared his throat, then didn't speak. I reached for one more envelope. Inside, a check for $0. Memo line, paid in full. I slid it across the table toward Barbara. This is the last check you'll ever expect from me. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out Grandpa's green silk handkerchief. The one he gave me. The one he called a reminder that quiet men still matter. I folded it neatly and placed it beside the binder. Turned to Kenton. He remembered who I was, even if you didn't. I stood. Adjusted my coat. Cheryl whispered something. Maybe my name, maybe not. I didn't look back. Barbara's voice followed me, sharp as ever. You'll regret this. I paused at the doorway, just long enough. No, I said, but maybe you will. I didn't slam the door. I didn't have to. The morning after that dinner, I woke before my alarm. Light eased through the blinds, catching on dust I hadn't noticed the day before. The apartment was still, quiet in a way that felt earned. I reached for my phone, thumbed through a few notifications without much thought, until I saw it. Subject line, reminder, hospice payment, auto withdrawal confirmed. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it said. I tapped into my bank app. They'd used my card again. After everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen. My jaw didn't clench. My chest didn't tighten. It just settled. Like some part of me already expected this. Like the final betrayal didn't need to scream. It just had to confirm what I already knew. I deleted the email. Then I stood up and made coffee. Mid-morning, I slipped on my jacket, slid Grandpa's green handkerchief into the pocket, and headed out the door. There's a park 3 blocks from my building. He used to walk there when the air was dry and his joints were stiff. He'd toss breadcrumbs to birds and hum old hymns to himself, the kind with no chorus and too many verses. I sat down on the same bench he always did, pulled the handkerchief from my pocket, held it for a minute, folded it again. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head, I heard myself, sometimes closure doesn't come from others. It comes from choosing not to carry what they left behind. I left the handkerchief on the bench, stood, and walked home. The phone rang that afternoon. Jessica. Her voice was hesitant. Uncle Dale? Mom said you're not coming to Thanksgiving. I waited. She doesn't understand, but I think I do. Silence stretched between us. I found a folder on Grandma's computer, she said, voice lowering. It's called Dale Receipts. It had everything. Dates. Amounts. All of it. Another pause. I think they knew. I think they just assumed you wouldn't say anything. My reply came soft, firm. That used to be true. Not anymore. That night, I sat at my desk and typed a short email. 1 sentence. The past doesn't define the future, but I won't walk backward to pretend it never happened. I attached the hospice account closure form. Nothing else. Didn't block them. Didn't invite them back in. Boundaries are built for the ones who don't know when to stop knocking. Forgiveness is for me. They can keep the guilt. 3 days later, I made dinner. Not a feast, just enough. roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pie Aileen brought. Jessica arrived first, awkward, a little unsure. Uncle Frank followed, with that tired but kind energy he always carried. We sat around the table, talked about Grandpa, laughed, remembered the quiet things he did, the things no one applauded, but everyone leaned on. Dessert came. Jessica looked at me, her voice steady. This feels more like family than anything I've ever known. I didn't need a reply ready. I just leaned back, looked around the room, and thought, I didn't reclaim my seat at their table. I built one where I finally belonged.